Back live with us tonight and in focus, and thanks for staying on. Former KwaZulu-Natal ANC Secretary General, or shall I say Provincial Secretary, Mdumiseni Ntuli says slate politics are not the solution as the governing party gears for its 55th National Conference in December. He was speaking in Khayelitsha, where the Tweni Zenzile Branch nominated him for the Secretary General position. Ntuli is fast gaining ground support for the key position with only 6 weeks to go to the much anticipated Congress. He joins us now to give us his perspective. Mpemba, good evening. Good to have you with us, and thank you very much for your time tonight here on In Focus. Let's begin here. I mean, there's been a branch nomination extension. I think this whole process now extended to about November the 7th. Do you welcome that extension? Do you think it makes things better for you in terms of your candidacy, or were you already ready to go to conference?
Well, good evening to you, Mr. Ntuli, and the viewers at home. I don't think that the extension is essentially an advantage to me as a person or as an individual. But I having followed what the National Executive Committee said when it was extending the cut-off date, I'm quite convinced that it was done in the best interest of the African National Congress, because the assessment was conducted and the conclusion was that a number of branches have not yet convened successful BGMs, some of them due to circumstances that are beyond their own control. So I as a member of the ANC, as a leader of the ANC in my province, I was also very happy that the extension was done. And I think that it was done in the best interest of the African National Congress rather than any particular leader of the ANC.
Yeah. As a leader of the ANC, as you put it, in the province, you're well familiar with the principle or the concept highly practiced in the African National Congress called democratic centralism, which of course means the decisions of a higher structure must be absorbed by lower structures and so on and so forth. Let's talk about that in the context of you not having the provincial or shall I say the support of the province as you go to conference. How is that principle of democratic centralism going to affect your chances of meeting the threshold?
Well, in this case, Thabo, the principle of democratic centralism is actually not applicable, in a sense that in terms of the constitution of the ANC, as well as our own historic conventions, every member of the ANC has a right to elect and be elected. And in this case, what you would have noticed earlier this year, including done by my own province, was essentially what we call a generation of a perspective of what could be considered as possible leaders or candidates for different responsibilities going to the 55th National Conference of the ANC. But it has nothing to do with a binding decision that once your province does not mention your name, and therefore to avail yourself to stand the certifiance of that decision, including even after the nomination processes are done, because as you know, the nominations are going to be concluded over this coming weekend. It may very well be that at the conclusion of those nominations, certain names will not appear as leading names for certain provinces or provinces where they come from. But it doesn't mean that those names will no longer be permitted, or it would be ill-discipline for such comrades to accept that the conference can still decide to nominate them, and if they become available for any position, it is within the authority of the conference to decide whether or not they are elected.
Yeah. Do you think this time around, and why do you think it will be possible that the winner takes all, the slate winner takes all situation is not going to be repeated? Why do you think it will be different this time?
Well, firstly, it excites me. I'm very excited that, and I'm sure many of the genuine members of the ANC would be very excited that we stand a possibility to defeat the slate politics. And I've made an observation over the past few days that there are comrades, including in the social media, who, for instance, were characterizing me as what they call an independent candidate. And to a larger extent, I forgive those comrades. Some of them are relatively new to the ANC. They've joined the ANC 10, 15 years ago. And of course, by that time, the politics of slates was very dominant in the organization. But any period before the National Conference of the ANC in Polokwane in 2007, almost 15 years ago, you were not having a slate politics in the ANC. The leadership was chosen on the basis of potential for responsibilities that comrade is being considered for. There wasn't this thing that there would be meeting of provinces that must convene and pronounce their preferred lineup. The leadership was allowing branches to go through the nomination process. At the end of that exercise, a consolidation will be done by the province, which will then be indicative of a dominant view within that particular province that would largely inform the direction of the leadership of the organization. But if you are not familiar with how the ANC works and how it has been working, you become a victim of what is called subcultures, cultures that are at variant with the historical position and the convention of the African National Congress. But because they've so much entrenched themselves into the organization, just for a few years ago, I mean, from the 52nd National Conference, that was about 10, 15 years ago, you may very well think that it is a taboo, it's unheard of for comrades to avail themselves and not be associated to any slate. For that matter, slate politics is very dangerous to the ANC, in a sense that you become beholden to your people, to people who have elected you, because they remind you that, look, maybe you are not going to make it for this kind of a position. It's only because you were associated with Thabo Mduli that made it possible for you to be known by branches and delegates, as a consequence of which you got elected. But as a leader of the ANC, historically in the ANC, you do not have to depend on being an extension or an appendage of anybody else, except availing yourself for a responsibility which you think you have what it takes to execute.
Yeah. Talking about that association, others, as you put it, call you an independent candidate. Others are looking at the branches that nominate you, one of them being current President Cyril Ramaphosa's branch here in Johannesburg that has put up your name, and some of the branches that are nominating you, for example, in the Eastern Cape, are also those branches that are supporting the second term of President Cyril Ramaphosa. Do you think that association could certainly work in your favor or not in your favor?
You know, the party in Thabo has been very interesting with regard to the name of Comrade Mdumiseni Ntuli. Very, very interesting. You would know that I think a majority of branches in KwaZulu-Natal have nominated Comrade Zolim Kize for the position of president, together with myself for the position of Secretary General. Wherever Comrade Titi Mabuza has been nominated for the position of president, wherever, and I'm saying literally wherever, except maybe one, he has been nominated with myself as Secretary General. The same apply with Comrade Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. So to really associate me with the nomination of course, dominantly, the majority of branches that would have nominated me are also the same branches that nominated President Cyril Ramaphosa for the second term. But it is not essentially an association with the president, but it is rather choosing or contemplating choosing someone that I think the majority of branches are of the view that brings in an element that will complement the work of President Cyril Ramaphosa if he's so re-elected into the second term as president of the ANC. And I think for me that is quite interesting. You will know that there is a caucus that met 2-3 weeks ago, which is so-called a CR17 caucus, purported to be supported by the president. But I know that the president is not part of that caucus. And that caucus produced a lineup that has got a different candidate for the position of Secretary General. And many people had said in the movement, look, we are not electing President Cyril Ramaphosa with a particular package. We want President Cyril Ramaphosa, those who want him to be re-elected, with a capable leadership, starting from the deputy president up to the Treasurer General of the organization. So there's not really been, for me in particular, and that has been very heartening to me. I'm very happy about that because, as I'm saying, it communicates a clear commitment on the part of the ANC structures to defeat the slate politics, which has resulted in the ANC losing the support amongst the people from the elections of 2009, post-Polokwane conference up to today. If you look at the performance of the ANC from 2009 up to today, we have been declining literally in each and every elections, and the worst off was November last year. And part of the reason, if you trace the problem to our decline, is division, disunit, slate politics, which has resulted in many instances where a leadership that is not capable to lead is chosen on the basis of association to certain other comrades who are being elected together with them on the slate politics. I think the ANC is coming to an end to that, and all of us who are genuine members of the ANC are very committed to ensure that we defeat it because there's not work for the organization.
How can, from your mouth, come the word capable leadership with the people that you're elected with? Yet at the same time, you said that what has happened with that decline that you've just mentioned now is a failure of leadership in general. In other words, the current NEC leadership and those who are in government have generally failed in terms of their leadership. Yet you would want to be in the top 6 with those same leaders.
The challenges and the complexities around which we have suffered many setbacks since 2009 are very complex and very difficult to deal with. Let me give you one scenario, for instance. You know, in all our reports in the ANC, there's been an admission, an unconditional admission that we are carrying within the ANC a number of people who are not members of the ANC, genuine members of the African National Congress. And these are the same members that, if they happen to be in their majority, will inevitably produce a leadership at the level of the branch, the region, the PEC, and the National Executive Committee. And the production of that kind of leadership from the membership, that in itself is not of the standard that is necessary and appropriate for the African National Congress, is bound to give you conclusions or difficulties to lead the population on the ground. So the failure is not essentially a failure merely of the National Executive Committee. It's a crisis within the institution which has to be addressed. And that is why I've been advocating for a scenario where post this conference, let's allow a situation where each one of us who are members of the ANC, whenever our membership expires, must then be afforded an opportunity to explain to the ANC as an organization, why should my membership be renewed as Mdumiseni Ntuli? What is it that I'm bringing to the ANC? What talent, what commitment? What is my understanding of the value system of the ANC? Am I in my own conduct? You know, I wish for a situation, a Thabo, where in the future, as it happens in other organizations, including the Communist Party of China, where I get recommended, for instance, to be a member of the ANC because of my distinct conduct and my work within the area where I come from here in KwaZulu. Unless we move towards that direction, and the starting point for me is to say, because you can't convene a meeting and say, when I look at you, Thabo, you look like a staff writer. It's not possible to say it. But when the membership expires and I'm required to justify what skills, what talent, what commitment am I bringing to the ANC, what am I prepared to sacrifice by virtue of being a member of the ANC, I'm telling you, that will give us an opportunity to select the best in society so that once we have the best joining the African National Congress and retaining the rest of us to be just the voters of the ANC, I can tell you the quality you will see in government will be a microcosm of what you see in the African National Congress, and that will also follow in terms of the performance. Unless you deal with that, it will be very difficult to improve the capacity of the party and the state to deliver on this mandate.
In the widely shared slates, you get names like Mbalula, Kigaba, Maswale, Mabuyane, Ramokhopa, and so on and so forth. What makes you a better candidate than all those in that list?
Well, I don't think it's really about being better than them. I think it's a question of what is it that I think needs to be done? What do I stand for? What do I represent? It may very well be that they also share what I represent. You see, my view is that we need to reorganize the headquarters of the ANC. If we are practical about the renewal of the ANC, the first thing I've explained already, who are these people who are members of the ANC, and how to ensure that we retain within the ANC body only genuine, committed members of the ANC. The second thing is that let's reorganize the headquarters of the ANC. I'm advocating for a scenario where you have two secretary generals of the ANC. One DSG that must focus on the campaign because we've lost the support, Thabo, amongst what we call the motive forces of the National Democratic Revolution. The working class, the youth formation, the students, the traditional leaders, the religious sector. the ANC has lost a huge support within very strategic sectors of our society, including business for that matter. It's because we are not organizing within those sectors. And I'm saying if you have a TSG whose primal objective day and night is to imagine what more needs to be done to ensure that the ANC's influence is extended in these sectors, you are not going to change the situation. The other person that I'm saying should be there is a TSG that must focus on research, production of new knowledge, building the policy institute of the ANC, and ensure that the ANC does not only generate ideas and policies, but it has a capacity not only to implement, but to monitor and to ensure that we choose the best amongst us to discharge the responsibilities of social transformation in our country. So that is what, in my own view, I think I really would want to be contributing if I have an opportunity to become the Secretary General of the ANC. And of course, the SG in that context must then be the custodian of unity and the custodian of the main trust of the renewal of the ANC in this way. We don't want an SG that would be fearful of taking major decisions. We don't want an SG that would be found wanting on matters of principle, that I will not be able to say or act in this particular way because it affects a friend of mine and it affects someone who may have elected me into office. I said this even when I was a provincial secretary of the ANC. I said the leadership of the ANC must not be elected in order to be re-elected. The leadership must be elected and it must lead during their term of office and deal with the consequences of whether you have led in a way that you get re-elected. If you have antagonized many factional forces and they become a majority in the next conference, they decide not to elect you, so be it. As long as we have done that based on principles and based on advancing what the ANC stands for and what the ANC is supported by the masses of our people for. The fact that there may be a majority of people who do not share that kind of a direction of the African National Congress, it doesn't mean it's wrong. It means we have a great deal of work to do to change the mindset and to ensure that everybody understands the purpose for which we joined the African National Congress.
Mpemba, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on.
Much appreciated.
That is the former KwaZulu-Natal ANC Secretary, Mdumiseni Ntuli.